Hi, this talk is about choices in childbirth, particularly the human rights laws applied to families, to midwives, and to everybody. That's the wonderful thing about human rights. They apply to everybody in every country, whether it's Scandinavia, Australia, North or South America, Europe, and the UK. So I'm focusing on some events, particularly around the UK. It's had a recent maternity investigation 5 years ago. The start of that investigation shared very similar conclusions to at the end of the 5 years. Essentially, maternity services are unsafe. The ironic thing is that when we talk about safety, or particularly when hospitals try to impose safety rules and regulations on others, as we've seen with COVID, sometimes the imposition of what is perceived to be safety is actually unsafe. So telling mothers they need to have a hospital birth or a cesarean or an induction when that's not what they would like, it's not their choice. That coercion, that bullying, that pushing against a woman who has her instincts about what is best for her. She's known her body all her life. She knows her baby. She can make her own choices, even if they seem illogical to others. As we've seen, research changes over years, but the person's self-knowledge, their self-determination, bodily autonomy remain something throughout time, something absolutely essential in all of us. So looking at what are the human rights, number one is in the United Nations Convention of Human Rights, the right to life. So when we find a woman is coerced and bullied into, for example, hospital when she wants a home birth, or she cannot have an upright physiological birth, she has to have some kind of control, medical intervention, or at least she is given so much fear about a possible dead baby, she caves in and goes against her own inner judgment and agrees to something. Now, exploring that, the fear in the hospital is of litigation, the fear of a dead baby, dead mother, the fear that they are going to be embarrassed. Often embarrassment is a very powerful stimulation for the reason why people do what they do. It can be even more than whether it's safe, whether it's the best thing, is if a hospital is going to be embarrassed. And also the regulator. In the UK, they have a very kind of aggressive regulator. It over-regulates, it doesn't listen to registrants, to nurses or midwives, and it pushes its agenda to get a win at all costs. So it doesn't act fairly. If it finds information that would help the midwife or the nurse, it's pretty much the same with the GMC. So these regulators have active lawyers who simply want to win their case. They're not looking at what's fair or right or truth or justice, just winning. And they have very little accountability, almost zero, because they have parliamentary privilege. So when we've got hospitals and regulators, that's employers for most midwives as the hospital, threatening midwives, they will lose their job, they will lose their license if they attend to a woman outside of the guidelines, for example, a home birth for breech or twins, or if somebody is, quote, post-mature dates. Now, term is from 37 to 42 weeks, who decided when and what, and quite often a baby comes out at 42 weeks, 41 weeks, covered in white vernix, clearly an earlier than 40-week baby, not post-mature. And there's no recognition of this, no research really on this, and the next induction happens and also comes out as a baby that's not post-mature. So what we need to focus on is evidence, clinical evidence and legal evidence. It's always about evidence. So is there evidence that warrants a conversation with a woman, and does she agree and consent to a conversation about risks? So whether we're touching a woman or talking to a woman giving birth or in pregnancy about her choices, it's actually her choice to have that conversation or not. Consent only exists as long as there is refusal as a possibility. It can't be, do you want this or this? It could be something else. Or no, I don't want to talk about that. I don't even have to say no, I don't want to talk about it. It can be, I'm undecided, I'll let you know, or even with body language, walk away. That is perfectly legitimate in law. So the first article, the right to private and family life, sorry, I've jumped in there, right? Article 8 is the right to private family life. I'm going to come to that in a moment. Article 3 is the right not to suffer cruel and unusual punishment or torture. And it has been deemed by the courts that it's inhumane, degrading treatment if certain clinical things are done to you that you did not really consent to. For example, being pushed into an induction, having vaginal examinations against your will, having an episiotomy, that's the cut of the vagina, having the baby pulled out with ventouse or suction. Now, going back to the right to life, Article 1, the baby can take its own legal actions when it's an adult. In most jurisdictions, they add on a few extra years to when they come of age. So in the UK, you come of age 18, I think it's up to 25, the child can take its own actions. Up until then, somebody else could take an action on behalf of the child, and that does happen. I mean, a simpler case would be if you had a car accident with an unborn baby, the other car that caused the accident, their insurance would have to pay for damages or loss of life, or say the baby is injured, then that comes from the other insurance company, and you don't have to wait till the child comes of age. You can claim when they're a baby, or even an unborn baby, if the damage is quantifiable and the negligence has to show that there was direct causation from an event that is alleged to have caused it, that must actually have caused it. Whether it was intentional is another matter, then that can be negligence. If somebody died, it becomes manslaughter. Is that negligent manslaughter? Is it criminal manslaughter? There are other subjects really for another time. So focusing back to the human rights, Article 3 is that right not to suffer inhumane, degrading treatment, which women often have previously experienced trauma in hospital. They're afraid of the hospital, they don't want to give birth there, they want to give birth at home, and they need the midwives to be able to attend them. If midwives are threatened with loss of employment, loss of their license, then clearly that has an impact on not only women's choices, but women's safety and the safety of them giving birth. Throughout this, I'm saying women, I mean birthing person. It's not a term I'm familiar with, so I tend to say birthing women or mothers. So bear with me. Article 6 is the right to fair process. Quite often, engaging with public bodies, they fail to do that. Now, an individual doesn't have to do it, but a public body is obliged and is required by international law to respect human rights, including the right to fair process. We only have the rights we stand up for, so we do need to take challenges, and that means to court. Ombudsmen can be useful, tribunals can be useful, but it's really powerful to get a determination, such as a court judgment. And when a judge says in their own words how a hospital or the state or a regulator has got it wrong, this is very powerful and effective in causing change. We need change because what we've got is a very top-heavy culture of fear and power with the hospital, the state, and the little individual trying to have their rights heard very much squashed. That could be the midwife, it could be the woman, it could be the woman's partner. They're not listened to. Now, in the Ockenden report that took this 5 years of investigations, it showed there were many preventable deaths and serious injuries to mothers and babies in a particular hospital that was being investigated. I would say that extends probably to most hospitals in the UK most of the time, also to most hospitals that I've observed and listened to stories of around the world. Particularly Europe is not having a very good safety record or a very good human rights record. It's very coercive in its culture. One woman had twins. She went into the hospital, thought they were giving her oxygen, and she woke up with her twins taken out of her. Her partner had gone, and he came back and said they're in intensive care. They did a vacuum extraction, and that was an anaesthetic they had given her. That woman's so traumatized, the next birth, it has massive consequences. How will she birth? Where will she birth? Who does she trust? And when there's a breakdown of trust and confidence in the state system, women are having more and more unassisted births, free births, primal births, whatever terminology we will use. So they will choose to birth at home by themselves, and there may be associated risks with that. There are risks in the hospital. So which are the risks that the woman is preferring? She's preferring to avoid the bullying culture. And that's clearly identified in that Ockenden report. The British are very transparent to some extent, having this report. In some ways, the British system is seen as a progressive, developed country, but actually my observation of around about 50 hospitals over 30 years, it's quite backward, and it has a facade of forward thinking. So, for example, the more money and interventions it spends, the worse the outcomes, which correlates with the USA. It also has one of the highest per capita spending on maternity and one of the worst outcomes. So the better countries seem to be Netherlands, New Zealand, Scandinavian countries, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and especially Finland. Neighbouring countries, the Baltic, completely different. So much to learn from each other. Not saying one country's got everything bad. I visit the Balkans, and there's an absence of independent or home birth midwives or community midwives. So we've taken a case to Strasbourg into the European Court of Human Rights, where the mother of a baby born at home, who herself is a doctor, with the midwife, filed the case saying they should be providing for her right to private and family life, which leads us on to Article 8. And this was upheld 2012 in the case against Hungary, where the judges in the European Court said that a woman does have the right to determine how and where to give birth. By implication or inference, that includes who she chooses to birth with. So she could and should be able to have a choice to have her own midwife, an independent one, a midwife who has a relationship with her, who knows her. And so much research supports the relationship a midwife has with a woman, not only making it safer for the mother in childbirth and afterwards postnatally, but also for the baby, and also for many years afterwards, the whole family health is better. They're engaged with a healthcare provider, and sexual reproductive health issues are looked at. She has somebody trusted she will go to. And even a generation later, I found as a midwife, I have cared for the daughters of the mothers that I previously cared for. So another whole generation. I think when it's the granddaughters, it will be time to retire for sure. So yeah, I've been working a very long time in different countries and cultures, and I've seen the human rights being eroded. As I said earlier, we only have the rights that we stand up for. So midwives also need to stand up for their rights. When they're afraid of losing their job or their license, let's look at the midwives who are unregulated, who have left the profession. Maybe they've joined the International Register of Midwives, or they've gone to other countries, occasionally developing countries like in Asia or Africa, and they're working. They may come back to a European or UK or USA type Scandinavian countries and offer their services as a non-registered midwife, perhaps as a birth keeper. So more people are doing this. Why are they doing that? Because they've been threatened so often with employment issues, regulatory issues, and even the criminal law. When there's a death in the hospital or a serious injury, there's often no investigation, or certainly not a proper one. Ockenden report showed that in general, hospitals were resistant to examining and learning from anything. They actually bury evidence. They don't want to admit anything to a family. They're afraid of civil liability, and they just beat the midwives with a stick into submission. So the midwives are practicing a fear-based practice or culture where instead of doing what's best for this mother and baby, it's how will this look to my regulator and my employer? Will I be okay? Will I keep my job and my registration? And I'm sorry that I have to push the woman a bit, but won't it be a relief if she just gives birth and it's all over? Won't it be a relief if she just agrees to that induction, just agrees to the cesarean? Then I don't have to lose face talking to my colleagues about why she hasn't given birth yet, why she's in water in that room, or why she's at home, or why she's on all fours in the room upright when it's a normal birth or a breech birth. It's the woman's natural instinct and choice to do that. But in a hospital, she's having those choices taken away, if not directly, indirectly, with kind of implication of, well, it's safer to do this, and I just need to examine you, and I just need you to go on your back. I just need to listen or monitor the baby and leave you on the bed without freedom of movement. And in a way, that's a form of inhumane, degrading treatment, as I mentioned Article 3 earlier. And Some hospitals will have the mother's arms, particularly in caesareans, strapped down. And there's other forms of restraint that have clearly been identified as illegal. We're not allowed to do them, and yet the common practice in some hospitals is, yes, they do them, until there's a reason to stop. So human nature is often, we do what we do because we can. We won't if we can't. Somebody has to stop them. And that can be the media, it can be a judgment, it can be somebody shining a light, a doula, a birth attendant, a partner, a family member, raising an eyebrow, saying stop, or asking, why are you doing that? Is it necessary? Is it really necessary? And pausing and waiting. Sometimes it is, or it appears to be necessary to save somebody's life, but far less than we think. We are told too often, this is to save your life or your baby's life. And there's no evidence. So again, keep coming back to show me the evidence. Can I see it? You're relying on some research, show me that. It doesn't actually matter about the research. What matters is the individual clinical picture and the individual informed choice and refusal of that person. There could be research this way or that way. They can still make a choice that seems illogical, but it's their choice. And the law respects that when it goes to court. The problem is we're not going to court. We're having mini courtroom dramas with people seen in a hierarchy. And really a hierarchy is just a structure of bullying. The higher up it goes, the more somebody's going to bully. So you've got a chief executive telling the head of midwifery what to do, the head of midwifery telling community midwives or home birth midwives or labour ward midwives or birth centre midwives what they can and cannot do, instead of them being autonomous, making their own clinical judgments of what the woman agrees to, what she would like, what they feel they can offer and work with. And if they can't offer something, they get somebody else and mix the skills around so they can support the community and listen to the community, engage with the community. One of the greatest problems facing maternity care everywhere is the centralisation. Having great big university teaching hospitals, so teaching is almost more about the teaching than it is about the woman and her experience of giving birth. She becomes almost a guinea pig in a big teaching system. So centralised care does not work. It has poorer outcomes. We need decentralised care. People think that costs money. The smaller investment in that prevents larger loss of money in claims from staff, employment law claims, claims from families, but also the whole breakdown of society and hospitals and how we're born. It leads on to our relationship with ourselves. If there's a breakdown with ourselves because of a loss of connection with the mother, with the self, because of traumatic births, or having a mother who's traumatized, how is she interacting with her baby? How is she feeding her baby? How's her mental health? And we see mental health largely ignored, and yet one of the greatest causes of maternal mortality and morbidity. In addition to the mothers and babies who die and who are harmed, I would say the nurses and midwives have their own traumas. We could call it secondary trauma when they're observing, for example, a catastrophic caesarean that's cut through a placenta not known to be there and the baby's died. And this is the case mentioned in the book by Adam Kay, the obstetrician who thinks he's written a comical book, but it's really quite appalling description of the NHS, the British government hospital system, of pushing the doctors, pushing the midwives, and they go into situations with assumptions. So he assumed the placenta was in another location, he assumed another doctor had checked, cut through, and the caesarean that's safe and saving somebody's life killed the baby. So I lost my thought on that point because the emotions are very powerful in this whole topic. I'm going to wind it up there. I leave myself open to questions and invite others to invite me to engage more. I have attempted to engage with the regulator, NHS England. In every country I invite the Ministry of Health. Sometimes it's the Ministry of Justice we're getting involved with. Work with human rights organisations, and as I said, file cases in courts, including the UK High Court, the European Court in Strasbourg, and provincial courts in each country and constitutional courts. So we need them to make decisions. Is what they're doing okay? Could it be better? Let's shine a light on it. We do this by taking action. So if there's one word from this presentation I'm wishing for all of us, is action. The other one for ourselves is self-compassion. So I'm wishing everybody self-compassion. Let's take action together.